What's up, guys? This is Aiden here on the Long Island Fishing Podcast, sponsored by the New York Angler. Today I'm here with Chris Voorhies, a seasoned surfcaster and custom plug builder from the South Shore of Long Island right here. How are you, Chris?
How you guys doing? Great to be here, Aiden.
So today we're going to focus on surfcasting with plugs, mainly the plugs that Chris builds, and also just what you want to look for when you go out and targeting these big trophy spring stripe bass. So I guess we could just start back with your background. Like, where did you really start and become inspired to build these custom plugs?
Well, I mean, I started off just like anybody fishing. You know, I was a young kid. I lived on the beach. So before I got into plug building, I mean, I would just strictly fish bucktails. Just because it was easy. My uncle, he was a member of the Empire Striper Club, and he got me into surf fishing. And I would literally just as a kid walk the beaches with a pocket full of bucktails and do really well. And then he introduced me into metal lips, and it was just like a whole new world for me. I mean, you know, with the bucktails, you as a kid, you know, you guys kind of was just casting them out, reeling them in, and because there was a lot of fish around, I got lucky. I didn't get big fish, but when he gave me, I think the first plug, I mean, it's not even that big of a plug, but it was a Gibbs Danny, and to me, it was just like, it was huge. It might as well have been like 2 feet long. You know, I was just like, wow, look at this, and you know, you could just cast it out, and you could feel, you knew everything that it was doing. And I got into plugging. As much as I still bucktailed, and even to this day I still bucktail. But that was my first, you know, introductory into like metal lips, and that was probably in the mid '80s, 1980s. And then from there I would just tinker, and I mean my mom would go crazy because I'd cut off all the tops of her broomsticks and try to make plugs out of them, and you know they didn't work too well, but that was really the beginning of making plugs, and I was a kid, and I would just put screw eyes in them, put hooks on them, try to make poppers. You know, they didn't catch me.
That's awesome.
And then I would just gradually, you know, I was so obsessed with fishing, even, I mean, from a young age, and even now I'm still obsessed with it. I mean, and in the wintertime, I would go nuts because I was a surfcaster. I mean, I worked on party boats in Sheepshead Bay and things like that, but at heart, I was a surfcaster, and our season is it's fairly, you know, in the wintertime, there's just, what do you do, you know, if you're a surfcaster? And so I would paint my Rebels and my red fins. I would load my red fins. So I was always tinkering. And, you know, my father was, besides an avid outdoorsman, he was also a furniture maker. So I was always around those kind of materials, that kind of wood. So it kind of came natural to me when I decided to start to really make my own. And even to this day, you know, when I make lures, I make them for my needs. You know, as much as I have a lot of guys out there buying plugs and they ask me, oh, can you make this, can you make that, but every plug that I make has come from a certain situation that I've come to encounter in fishing. You know, so I won't make a lure and then say, well, how can I make this work to catch fish? I'll always have a spot or an area that has a need, and then I'll make a lure based on that. And that's kind of how I got into making the troller, which is kind of what I'm popular for now. And, you know, I've been building since, you know, the early 2000s, but the troller is really what kind of, I guess, catapulted me into people knowing who I am. And it's because it catches big fish, if you fish it right. I think I've got one of those here I can show you. So, and it's
Surf bag.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so this is a newer one. This is kind of like what I've made just for this upcoming spring, because we'll have some bunker around. So it's about 5 ounces, and you know, it's a deep diving metal lip, and you know, it's called a troller because it was originally designed to be trolled behind a boat. And the first time I made this was because my uncle had asked me, actually, and he was a boat fisherman, the same uncle that got me into surfcasting. And he said, oh, you know, when he knew I was making plugs, he said, hey, you know, why don't you try to make me a troller, you know? And again, like I said, I had always made plugs, you know, for my needs. And this was one that actually, it wasn't for my needs. It was for his. So he had given me a couple of different trollers. Gibbs made a troller. Pickney made a troller. And Donnie Musso made a troller. And out of those three, I kind of came up with something for him. And it's actually different than what this design is now. But So I made that for him, and it worked for him. And then, it wasn't until probably it might have been like almost 10 years later that I had a spot. And I remember when I was testing that lure, how stable it was. And I was like, wow, that lure really, you could fish that. You could probably fish that from the surf, not knowing that guys did fish trollers from the surf. And I was fishing an area where I needed it. The water was just flying. It was a rip. And I said, let me go back to that lure. So I had a couple of the prototypes that I met. And again, I played around to one that would be better casting from the surf. And I came up with that. And it's really, because guys, I don't think I've ever caught a fish that wasn't a keeper on that plug, which is kind of, and that's not to say that it will outfish any plug, but it will cull those smaller fish. You'll get those smaller fish away where you'll get the bigger fish. So like when I go fishing, and when I fish with my buddy, he'd always, say he was fishing something smaller and he'd be smashing fish and I would be fishing that. He'd be like, go to this soft plastic, go to this. And I don't know, I'd just be patient. And then, he might have had 25 fish that night and I had one, but the one that I had was 30 pounds. So,
that's awesome.
It
definitely has a larger profile than most other plugs that I've fished personally. Yeah. It's a pretty cool thing. Before you were talking about you were fishing in a rip. So how do you fish this lure? Can you fish it in anything, or is it stronger current?
I make different types. I make what's called a deep diving troller, and I make a standard troller. The standard troller works really well when you have moving water, because that moving water drives that plug down. So you can cast it out into a rip. You can cast it out if you're in an inlet. But it really needs moving water to really work at its fullest potential, because that moving water, the force of it will just keep driving it down. Then I came out with, because I'd have spots that were very deep water that I wanted to get down deep, but I really, you'd have to have a 200-yard cast to really eventually get that plug to where you needed to, that productive water. So I came up with what was called a deep diving troller. And that was just making some modifications to the lip. Different wood. I use an entirely different wood than my standard troller. They look fairly similar. I mean, if you hold them side by side, you can look at and you can see the differences, but the obvious differences are inside. It's the weighting of it. And that plug will get down without moving water.
Oh, okay. So you don't need like a strong current
right.
to get
So
that thing
yeah.
down.
So if say you have like a back bay basin that it's got a really deep hole, and that those big fish are down at the bottom, that's when that plug will shine.
That's awesome.
Where the standard troller, you kind of need that moving water to get it down there. This one you don't, and it'll dive down there. And the deep diving troller will also work in a rip equally well. It might go too deep sometimes. It might get down to the bottom. It depends. Every area is different. Every condition is different. And one of the common things that guys always ask me is like, well, how deep do they get? And it's hard to really answer that. I mean, guys that troll them actually in a kayak will get them down to like 30 feet, 25, 30 feet. But casting, that can be unrealistic because you need that much line out. If you make a 10-yard cast, you're not going to get down 30 feet typically, unless you're holding it there. So you asked how to fish it. A lot of times I'll go in a rip and I'll cast the plug out there, and I won't do anything. I'll just engage, and I'll get the slack out of the line and just let the plug just start, let the water do it, and let the plug just start diving and getting down. You'll bump bottom, slow down a little bit, then start doing your retrieve. There's so many different techniques, and I talk about a lot of those techniques. Actually, my buddy and I, we run a YouTube channel as well, Comanche Surfcasting. So if you guys out there, you want to check that out.
I've seen that. I didn't know that was you, actually.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So we do some videos on that. My buddy Pete puts those together, does a great job. So you can check that out. I've done some videos, discussing how to fish them as well.
Yeah, I've seen Comanche Surfcasting all over social media, Instagram and YouTube. I actually didn't know just until this very moment that was you. That's pretty cool.
Well, that's my buddy Pete, myself, Fred, and Nick. We're all part of that group. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. You guys have like a really good message in terms of the catch and release.
Yeah, I mean, especially now, the fishery is not in the state that it should be, and it's overfished, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and there's a lot of blame to put out there, but it really falls on us as the recreational fishermen. I mean, we are the vast majority of the guys that are out there fishing. So really, even to your listeners out there, it's, let's be responsible. This is not an endless resource. The potential for this to crash we're there. I've fished when it crashed. I was a young kid and I was growing up surf casting, and we don't want to see that, and we're really close to it. I think the fishery is in a lot worse state than we actually know, or that the science is saying. I think it's actually worse. And it's just things that I've gradually seen over the years, and it's changing, and there's all kinds of excuses that guys will make. Oh, the fish have pushed out, or the water's warm. Well, we've always gone through those obstacles before, but right now the fish just aren't there. I mean, guys are saying, oh, that they're out 2 miles, but they've always been out there. I've fished on party boats. The fish have always been stacked out outside. It's just that the range is shrinking now, and the surf fisherman is usually the first indicator of they're out there, and that's usually the first range that starts to shrink is that that surf in close, and so really urge people just to I know you can take your keep. I know you can you can catch as many fish as you want every day and keep a fish every day, but let's just be responsible. If you're going to freeze that fish or you're going to give that fish away, maybe think about that. Maybe think, or keeping those trophy fish, those breeders, and maybe just think about the future of this fishery, and try to have some respect for these fish too. As you're dragging them up on the beach, we're all happy, we're all excited, but realize that you want to try to get this fish back in the water as healthy as possible, because the ultimate goal is you want these fish to breed, and every fish that you take out of there is another fish that's not going to breed. It's not going to lay eggs, and so, it's just something to really think about.
That was very well said. And even I'm very young, so you got to think about not just the now, but into the future. Yeah. I want to be able to catch fish my whole life. I want to be able to catch these awesome trophy bass my entire life. And I want my kids and my grandkids to be able to do that. And if we're not, like you said, giving respect to this species, that's not going to be able to happen, because, you're just draining the population.
Right. And it really is. It's the future. I really, it hurts, but I really think that the trophy days are probably over for me. I probably won't be, let's hope it's not true, but those days of those big 50-pound fish might be over for me. A lot of those fish are dead. They're still out there. I know there's guys going to be listening, like, oh, of course there's still 50s out there, but, obtainable that most guys are going to be able to catch them. But you have to think of your future, you have to think of the children. You have to think, even, and if you're a tackle shop owner, if you're a manufacturer of fishing products, think of the future for yourself too. A lot of these companies are promoting kill tournaments, and it's just like shooting yourself in the foot, I mean, you're going to be out of business if these fish aren't around. So it's not just the thinking of, the recreational angler. It's also the thinking of, the industry as a whole has to really take charge of this, because it's their future. It's their money. Party boats, I worked on the boats in Sheepshead Bay, and a lot of these boats have gone to like being bruise cruises and other things, because the fishing's not around there. We saw it happen with the flounder. The flounder, there's no boats going out flounder fishing anymore. I've never caught a flounder. Yeah, and that's a shame. I mean, I grew up catching flounder.
Yeah, same thing with my uncles and my dad. They here living on the bay and living on the ocean, tell me about they used to go out in the winters and they used to catch so much flounder. Just throw a piece of corn out and they would hook up, fill buckets full of them. But now I've never seen one.
And there was a whole industry, that evolved around that. Party boats, bait and tackle shops, and that's just a huge. It's a shame that fish is, basically gone. But it's a shame that a lot of mom and pop stores are gone because of that, and that'll happen, because once the bass are gone, then guys are going to go after and target something else. It'll happen with sea bass, fluke, everything else. It's just a domino effect,
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that we as anglers and surfcasters need to take into our own hands. Yeah. That's definitely a very good message around the Comanche surf casting.
Yeah, and you don't want to wait for, somebody to set a regulation to tell you what to do. We really, because a lot of times it's too late, and so we don't want to have to wait to be told, okay, you can only keep this, and then that's what the rule we follow. If you're out there fishing, it's not what it should be, So let's take action before that, it ends.
Definitely, yeah. Getting back to, the plugs and the swimmers after that fantastic conversation about, striped bass. I believe we were on how you have the deep diving troller and then the regular troller. Yeah. I also see on your social media that you have the troller junior. Yeah. So is that just a smaller size? What different types?
So the troller, Yeah. So, well, I have a lot of different types.
Okay.
You know,
Do
it's
you?
just the you know, because I'll know ones that I'll make them a little bit heavier. Again, like I said, just for certain spots. But the ones that I sell are the troller, the standard troller, the deep diving troller, and the junior troller. And I started making the junior troller just because, you know, I like big baits because they, like I said before, I don't think I've ever caught a non-keeper size bass on one of my trollers. But the fact of the matter is that big fish do eat small bait, peanut bunker and things like that. So I made the smaller troller. One, it's easier to cast. You know, if you're out there fishing for, a full tide and you're casting 5.5, 6 ounces all night long, it's going to beat you up.
Yeah.
So the junior troller I made, one, you could fish a little bit longer. It was a little bit more realistic as well. It helped because other guys who aren't fishing rods that are rated up to 5 ounces, most guys aren't fishing that. So I made the smaller one, again, for myself because a smaller bait, but it took off in popularity because other guys who couldn't fish my lures because it just wasn't, it's not their style of fishing big bait, big plugs. So the junior troller really took off in popularity, and it catches.
Yeah,
Again,
awesome.
it's a good, it'll work even with sand eels around, peanut bunker. We had one night this summer in Montauk where we crushed them because there was some peanut bunker around, and we hadn't been seeing peanut bunker, but they showed up, and that junior troller was just, that was the ticket, And if you had thrown the bigger troller, you weren't going to catch,
So how would you, as a custom plug builder, differentiate your own metal lip swimmers from others?
Well, again, like I said, I think maybe I make them a little bit for a niche. I think too, there's a lot of guys that make plugs, and it's not to take anything away from guys that make plugs, but I think a really good plug builder is also a really good fisherman. And I know guys that build plugs, and they're okay fishermen. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, oh, I've seen you out there fishing. I'm like, how are you building plugs, But so I think kind of I'm able to take that knowledge of fishing and put it into the plug building world. I kind of know what I need. And like I said, again, I think it's really key to not make a plug because somebody else made a plug, or, I'm making pencil poppers now because the pencil popper bite was killer in the canal. Well, if you don't fish pencil poppers, then you really don't know, what you should be making with a pencil popper. So, and that's not to say that there's not guys out there. I mean, there's lots of great plugs, and we're in, I think, in the social media aspect of it is guys learning really fast how to make plugs. It's good and it's bad in a way, but there's so many choices. If you're a fisherman now, it's great. You have. And with that, like, I don't just fish my plugs. There's plugs that I don't make because there's already builders out there who do it right. Like I said, I started making plugs because I needed them and they weren't available. And like I said, so one of the early plugs I made was getting into when I finally got a lathe, which is a machine that turns a piece of wood as you carve it. Yeah. So when I finally got that, I made a pencil popper because I had a spot that I was fishing that I couldn't reach with a standard pencil popper. At least, there might have been plugs out there that I could, but not that were attainable that I knew about. This is pre, social media really blowing up. So I made a pencil popper that was, about 4.5 ounces because there was a spot in a rip that I could not reach. And prior to that, I was using like a loaded Cordell pencil popper, and it just didn't, because I was loading it so much to get it out there, it just didn't have the life, and there was bunker. So I wanted I needed a big profile too. So that was one of the first plugs I made. Again, it was out of need. I made it, so I think that's probably what, that, and it doesn't hurt that, when you post a picture of a fish with your lure in its mouth, and guys can, they can't help themselves. They kind of like, I got to get one of those because it's going to catch a big fish. Now, you have to, you're not just going to take my troller and go down to the sand beaches here in Long Beach and cast it and catch fish. It's just, you have to know the right application. You have to know what bait is around. If you have a sand eel bite, you probably don't want to be throwing the troller. It's not, they get keyed in on those sand eels. So it's not going to catch for everybody, but in the right hands. And I'm always open, guys on my Facebook page. If you want, I'm on, it's Voorhies Customs. I just have a page. That's where, I talk about my lures and, guys show off the lures that they have. So I'm always open, to giving advice on how to fish it, things like that.
So we get into the specifics of that a little bit more, but you mentioned you also fish other lures.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to target strike bass from the surf, what's in your bag? What's in your surf bag, really? What do you carry with you?
Well, so it'll depend on the bait that's around. So I won't, I typically don't carry a lot. I mean, if you see here, this season I'm going to try the 3-tube bag, but I typically just go out with 2 tubes. That's it. Because I'm fishing a lot, so I know I'm keyed in onto what the bait is. So it's hard to say. I mean, if it's late in the season, and there's some peanut bunker around, or early in this season, like let's say I'm going out
in the springtime.
Yeah, in the springtime. So again, I might be a little bit different than most guys. In our area, the key bait, a lot of guys in the springtime, they go, soft plastics. Kitex are really great, small profile. But one of our first baits here in the western end of Long Island is bunker. So I'm one of I will go out there with big plugs because I know that there's bunker around. Now, if I don't see any signs of bunker, then I'll go to the soft plastics. I'll go to the Hoagies, the Sluggos and things like that. So if I were to go out right now we have herring exiting. So SP minnows are great for that. Redfins are great for that. So are metal lips. It just depends. You have alewives, so those are a little bit smaller. So the SP minnows are great for that. But we also have bunker coming in. The areas that I fish, I find if you have herring around, for whatever reason, they're a much hardier bait, and they seem to be harder for bass to catch. But I've had instances where there's bunker around and there's herring around, and they're on the herring. I don't know if it just has a higher nutritional value, if it's something that they want this time of year, or if they just know that those herring aren't going to be around. I don't know what it is, but so I'll downsize a little bit if there's still herring around and the bass have showed up. But I will kind of venture to be a little bit different than most guys, and I will be throwing big stuff. I'll be throwing big rubber shads. I'll be throwing big wood in the early spring, just because I know there's bunker around in our area. And if there's bunker around, those fish will be on those bunker. They'll be on that big bait. I hear all kinds of theories. Oh, the fish's mouth is soft and they're not aggressive. But if there's bunker around, those big fish, they'll be feeding on those bunker.
Definitely. So in the early springtime, when you're going to target these big bass, what do you look for as a place to go to catch them? Like, what are you looking for when you first walk onto the beach when it comes to the sandbars and the troughs? And what do you want to target when it comes to like the land structure? Yeah,
so the key word that you said is structure. And for big fish, it's key. And in the springtime, I typically won't focus so much on the ocean front, and that's not that they're not there. But it's kind of, for me, it can be a little bit of a needle in a haystack, and especially if you haven't been out doing your homework and doing the scouting in the early spring to see, because it's a soft structure in the front, and it changes, especially in our area. You can have one northeaster and in the structure. I mean, it will start to reestablish itself because of the way that the currents and things work. But what you should do is you should get out early in the spring, and you should go around those moon tides and get out at low water and start to look at how your structure has changed that year. And so if you see bars or you see troughs, but again, in the springtime, because I don't fish the ocean front so much, I tend to fish the back bays. I'll look for what the ospreys are doing. I'll look for the bunker. If there's herring around, then I'll focus a little bit more on the inlets, because I'll try to intercept those fish as they're coming in. For me, it's always fish use highways. If you've ever hunted, and I've done hunting as a kid. I deer hunted, I bow hunted, and fish use much the same way that deer use trails and wildlife use trails. They use trails. They use the least path of resistance, and they use that when they're coming into areas to feed. They use that when they're leaving areas to feed, and you want to find those paths, and you want to intercept those fish sometimes before they might get into the back bay, because even though the back bay is smaller than the ocean front, typically the inlet, when they're coming in there, if you can intercept them on the way in, your job is a little bit easier than have to go around and find where they've set up in the back bay. So a lot of times you'll see I'll look for gannets. The gannets are a good sign that the bait is coming in or the bait is leaving. So we'll get the gannets as the bunker are coming in. We'll get the gannets. They don't typically go into the back bays. They'll hang around the inlets, doing the same thing that I'm doing, try to intercept the bait as it's on the way in. You'll see the gannets going nuts because the herring are leaving and the gannets are feeding on the herring. So that's a really good sign that the bait is moving, and we've already had that. We've had the gannets already. So that was a sign that, we have some bait coming through our inlets. And so it's a good sign that you want to get out there and fish.
So I'm not completely sure. I've never heard that term, or maybe I have, but gannets, what is that?
So those are the birds that they're a real goofy looking bird, but they have a huge wingspan, and you'll see them. They're the birds that like literally just dive bomb into the water.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
They're not a seagull. They don't.
I know exactly what you're talking about. All the time, I feel like in fluke season, they're circling around the boat.
They'll be really high up though.
Okay.
When you're out on the water, I've seen them in the water. But they're usually not like seagulls. There's not like just a couple of them. They're usually like just droves of them, and you'll just see them like doosh, 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 just dive bombing, and they dive bomb in the water, and they'll actually swim a little bit and catch the herring in the bunker.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
They have like a black tip at their wing.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever seen them up close, they're really like a goofy looking kind of bird. They're big, they're huge. But it's a really good sign. They'll come into our inlets. They typically stay outside and in the inlets. They don't typically go into the bays, but I've seen them go pretty far into Rockaway Inlet. Not so much the other inlets, but that's one inlet they'll kind of push all the way up to like the Marine Parkway Bridge. You'll see them diving over there. But that's a good sign. Again, you could fish the ocean beaches. It's just not my style. This is fishing. So everything I say is like the reason we're all hooked on this is because there is no certainties in the world of fishing. You think you have it figured out and then you don't. So I know that there's plenty of guys who fish the jetties and who fish the beaches in the early spring and they crush it. It's just not my thing. It's just not. I'm just more comfortable, fishing those bunker pods. It's easy fishing. When there's a bunker bite, it's typically easy. It's not as easy anymore because there's, like we mentioned earlier, there's just not as many fish around. So I'm looking for bait. You go back to your question. The things I'm looking for are bait in the springtime. You can smell bunker. So if you get into an area, like on a day like tonight, when I'll go out, the wind is cranking. It's kind of difficult to see those bunker or see the signs of the bunker, but you can smell them. It gets kind of like a melony kind of smell in the air. It's so hard to describe, but you know it. And it's funny because I've been out sometimes and I'll be fishing with my buddy. He's like, "You smell that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And you get excited because some bunker just came in, and so that bunker is the big sign that I'll look for in the spring. And I'll go deep. You can catch. That's why I make the deep trollers. The key, I think, for me on catching bigger fish is deep. Those bigger fish are always close to the bottom. I shouldn't say always, but you could see signs of fish feeding, but if you go deeper, that's a lot of times where those bigger fish are at.
It's pretty cool with this like modern technology, like waterproof cameras and GoPros and stuff. You could see underwater shots. And just recently, I saw a video of a GoPro that was underwater, and you see these giant striped bass and how close they are to the bottom of the water, just feeding on like small crabs and clams. And people want to fish their baits, whatever, like a couple feet above the bottom of the water, but in reality, they're literally right above.
It's such a good point that you make. Yeah, it's such a good point that you make, and for me, when we get into talking about the summer, it's even more important. The springtime they are there, but in the summertime, it's almost like they're glued to the bottom, and there's reasons for that. I mean, we can get into that now. We can get into that when I talk about how my summer tactics are, but they're glued to the bottom in the summer. I mean, especially this summer I found with bunker they will come up, because bunker. They'll chase the bunker around, but it's such a good point that you make.
Yeah, let's go into the summertime now. I feel like we kind of covered the whole spring thing with, fishing the inlets and just structure and bait is the most important thing.
And even again, like you said, on the ocean front, it can be so difficult because the ocean front is typically soft structure and it changes a lot. But again, and even fishing around bridges, lights, people don't think of lighting being structure. It's a different type of structure, but the bait reacts to that light. So I mean, it is the key thing. And I don't travel that much. A lot of guys will travel all around, and I like to learn my area. And then when I do travel, I'll try to apply what I know from my area, and I'll see it in other spots. So if I see an eddy, I've learned like eddies are really good productive fishing areas, and I'll try to apply that to other. So if I could really give advice to anybody that's getting into fishing is look at structure and fish your home waters. Get to know your home waters because you don't have to travel. Don't rely on reports. Make your own reports. And just learn your backyard, because if you live by the water, at some point there's fish and coming through your area. So find out when and fish your home waters the best that you can. So then getting into the summer bite, it's a whole different game. The consistency is not there, but I do way better fishing in the summertime than I do in the spring or the fall.
Really?
Way better. Bigger.
From the surf? From
the surf.
Wow.
Which most people don't equate to.
Even for me, that's like kind of contrary to what I mean, at least what I used to believe. The spring and the fall was when you catch all the fish from the beach.
It's when you have, now the action might be better in the spring and the fall, but it's kind of strange. It's the inconsistency of the bait that makes it a consistently better bite. So you don't have like what you typically think. So again, this is a good time to target big fish. If you want to go out and if you're going to take somebody out fishing, it's probably not the best time, to introduce somebody into the fishing, because it takes patience, and it takes, a little bit of know-how. But for me, this summer over the last couple of years has been far more consistent than the spring and the fall. And it's because there's not what we think of as traditional bait. It changes the feeding behavior of the striped bass. So, I think of like let's say you say Montauk. Now, the summer might not be that good around us because the water's warm. You need to have an influx of cooler water, But again, you still catch them in the warm water. Now, I wouldn't target big bass in our bays in the summertime. They're there, but far, there's just not many. So you want to get a little bit more east. You want to find that cooler water, that moving water. But you go over to the North Shore. There's big fish in there in the summer because you've got some, Manhasset Bay. You've got some really deep water. So the key is in the summertime is to find that cooler water. Again, you're looking for structure, but you don't have as many baits around that you normally would have. But it's very conducive to big fish. The big fish, they come in at those key times, and they're, like we said, especially this summer, they're glued to the bottom. They're coming in, they're going for bagals, they're going for blackfish, they're going for porgies, they're going for crabs, all those resident fish that they're there in the summertime. Now we might not have, although, there is bunker around, you see bunker in Montauk, it's almost like a kiss of death that you're like excited to see bunker in Montauk. And traditionally, over the last 10 years, there hasn't necessarily been a bunker bite in Montauk, but there has been over the last couple of years. And it's actually made fishing worse for the surf fishermen because the bunker typically just stay out in the rips, and the big fish then have no reason to come up into the shallows because there is a bait. And it unless they chase them up into the shore, which doesn't happen that often, you get a little bit of influx of bluefish. That'll help. But for surf fishermen, the bunker, you're kind of like, oh yeah, because it can be stupid fishing when they do come in, but it's not consistent. They typically stay out in those rips, and they're out of reach for us. The boat fishermen hammer them because they just live line, and it's stupid fishing. Stupid fishing as in good,
easy.
Yeah. Well, it's as in good, it's just great. There's bunker around you. Net some bunker, snap some bunker, and but for surf fishermen, it's not that good because it doesn't push those fish in the need for food. So when there's not the bunker around there, like we had this past summer, there weren't as many bunker around as there were last year, and it was a good bite because it forced those fish to come in, those big fish, those lazy fish, at the key tide moments, the key tide times, to kind of come in and just do their little cleanup patrol, and they come in at again. You have to think of it, coming from a hunting background, it helps me a little bit. They use current, they use trails, and they come into those productive waters, along pathways, and those pathways are often rips or currents. and you find those spots. So if there's a cove, it's great. You can go into that cove and you can sit there and fish. But again, it equates to almost like fishing out on the ocean front a little bit. It's a vast area. It's hard to pinpoint, especially now when there's less fish. It's hard to pinpoint where they are in that cove. But if you can find to where they're approaching and they're coming into that cove, you can intercept them, and you can pick them off as they're coming in to feed. And that's what they're doing in the summertime. They're just the big fish again. They're just coming in, and they're glued to the bottom because they're picking lobsters, crabs, all those things. So you want to get your bait as close as to that, like you said when you saw on that video. You want to get it because they are basically glued to the bottom. They're not coming in to chase down, bait. They're coming in to pick off those easy meals, and that's what the big fish are after. They're after like the blackfish and the fish that that aren't like fast swimmers that they have to chase down. There's low oxygen level. The water's a little bit warmer. So like I said, like the inconsistency makes it consistent. The inconsistency of what we think of, the inconsistency of bait. But there's plenty of bait, and there's things that I look for. Even like say you're fishing Montauk or the North Shore or rocky areas. There's things I'll look for at low tide, like the more like weed that you have growing in the rocks is typically a better area because it has more crabs, it has more life in there, feeding in there. So those are things I'll look for at low water. So if I'm walking along the beach and I'm like, oh man, look, there's all this bubbleweed stuck in the rocks. I'm gonna come back here at high water because I know there's gonna be a lot of life inside that and those fish. And then again, you want to find a spot where those fish gonna approach from. How are they gonna come in? What tide stage? And that is all just getting out there and fishing.
Pretty cool. I just thought of this right now. It's kind of very similar to what you said about how you want to intercept the fish before they get to where they want to go, because you have more of a chance of getting them, in that condensed area. It's kind of like Cape Cod Canal.
Yep.
Instead of trying to fish the ocean or the bay or whatever, you're intercepting them in that canal where there's a condensed population of striped bass, making it way easier for you to hook up.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same concept, the same idea.
Absolutely. And it's something you want to, I use, so I mentioned that I don't just fish my lures, I fish other lures, and one of the lures I use to find, so it can be difficult too, because you can have a rip, and those highways change. It's not, when I was talking about hunting, the deer trails, you can clearly see where the deer are walking through to go to, like, say, a field to go feed, and they follow that area. And if you hunt, you'll see that the deer will go underneath. If there's a high spot in the fence, the deer will go underneath that rather than walk around, or even though they can jump over it, they'll go under it. It's least risk. But with fishing, that water does change, so you can get a wind at your back and it might push that rip out a little bit. So now those fish have moved out a little bit. You might get a wind in your face, and it's coming. So the rips change, and they change on the moon. They change at the tide stage. Those highways start to shift around. So it can be a little bit tough to find those highways, and that's where I come into play. I use the Super Strike bottle daughter. It's really, again, like I mentioned earlier on, how I liked when my uncle gave me that first Gibbs Danny, and I was like, oh, you could just feel the thing working. You knew exactly what it was doing. Well, the Gibbs bottle plug is a lot like that, and it's really a great tool for finding moving water. So, if I'm fishing on a new moon, it's hard. You can't necessarily see what the water's doing. And with my metal lips, they're always thumping. There's the lip on them is very aggressive, and there's just thump, 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 thump. But you can't tell what the water is necessarily doing with them. So with that, I use that especially the loaded one. It just doesn't. It needs moving water. It just doesn't, and you could feel it. It's not thumping. So I'll sit there and I'll just scan and scan and scan with that bottle plug, that Super Strike bottle plug, and then all of a sudden I'll feel, that's where the water's at. That's where it's moving. And if I'm catching fish on that I'll keep to that. If I feel like I need to go down a little bit deeper, then I'll go and I'll throw on my troller and I'll cast it into that area. And it's just a great fish finding thing, and especially if you want to fish bucktails, But that Super Strike bottle plug is a great tool for finding good water, moving water. And in the summertime, that's key. One, because the fish are using that as a way of moving around. They're also using that because it's a more oxygenated water. It's typically cooler water. You're getting to that moving water rather than that still water.
It's pretty cool. As a surf fisherman, your opinion, do you like fishing whitewater, like the big nor'easter type things when there's tons of white water and the wind's whipping, do you find that you catch more fish there, or is it the same? What is your opinion on that? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I mean, if I see, it's hard to turn that down. If I see good moving, I'm gonna fish it. But in all reality, ideally, I don't want any wind. I want very little wind. I want calm conditions. I can feel everything that's going on, and it's because again, it's different. If you want to go out and you want to bang a bunch of like good teen fish, get out in that whitewater. And that's, again, everything's not certain. That's not to say that there's not 50-pounders, 30-pounders in that whitewater, because there are. But there's a lot of fish in that whitewater. But yeah, and then in the summertime, though, you do. Like if you get a little chop in the water and you get a little, it's going to be good fishing,
Okay, awesome. I don't know what just happened to the GoPro. There might have turned off. I'm pretty sure I had it, I set it. I tried fixing it from last time. It doesn't make any difference to the audio, but last time I did a podcast with Joey Leggio and it turned off. I thought I fixed it, but I guess I'm gonna have to go back over that next time. So
but yeah, I will look for that moving water. It is good, but again, a lot of times especially if I'm fishing close to the bottom, it makes it difficult to know where your lure is at, what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, it's whitewater. Who could turn that down?
Yeah, definitely. In the past, when I first started surf fishing, it was almost like intimidating. I went out and I saw all this like white water in the early springtime, and the wind was whipping and it was kind of like drizzling, raining. I went out there, I looked, I was like, I don't even know. I don't know where to start when it comes to this, just because it's so overwhelming. And I feel like that's the same thing with a lot of new surf fishermen, or not even necessarily new, just people that don't necessarily know what to do in those conditions. It's a very intimidating thing.
It is. And the first thing that I would say to anybody that's new at fishing, even long-term guys, again, a lot of guys look at me like I'm crazy because in Montauk we'll have like those conditions, and I'll still throw a metal lip. You don't need to. When you have those conditions, guys are always obsessed with casting as far as they possibly can. And you don't necessarily need to do that in those conditions. Those fish, the reason whitewater fishing, or the reason when you have a big surf is good, is because those fish are close in. They're utilizing the beach. The bait is trapped. It's stirring things up. It's stirring the sand crabs. It's stirring it's getting the bait disoriented, and they're in close. And again, you can throw bucktails and you can get close to the bottom, and you could do really well if they're feeding on like those little mole crabs and things like that. It works really well. But the key in those conditions that people get so discouraged from is because you're trying to get out as far as you can, and in conditions like that, you really can't. So again, I do really well in those conditions, but I'm not looking to just like constantly get so many casts out there. I'll time my casts. So look at what the waves are doing, and it doesn't make any sense to, if the wave is just washing in, to throw your plug into that wave as it's breaking, because you're going to lose contact with it, and it's going to wash up, and it's going to be no presentation. So the key in big whitewater for me is you want to get your bait into that strike zone for the longest period of time that you possibly can while staying in contact with it. And a lot of times that means taking short little casts. As you see the wave coming in, just like dump a lure like right behind that wave, and reel in slow, and let the previous wave's water that's rushing out work that action. Sometimes you don't even have to reel. Just engage, get the slack out of your line, and let that plug dig and get behind the waves. And it could be great, great technique to use.
How do you find metal lips? How do they work in heavy conditions like that?
So a lot of guys would look at me like I'm crazy when I'm throwing like a junior in conditions like that. So the bad thing is again, you're not going to be able to cast them well, because typically you have a wind in your face, so they cast like crap. But again, you don't need those. You don't need to get out that far. And I find with a metal lip, there's going to be a moment that metal lip is holding in that current if you fish it correctly. And it's all about angle. So if I get into Montauk and there's a spot that I want to fish, a lot of times I'm not even casting straight out. I'm casting on an angle, depending what the wind is. So I'll try to push out to as far as I can to where I'm comfortable. I know I can land the fish and I'm not going to repeatedly get knocked off rocks, and just get that right angle and cast that lure over and let it swing in, and just stay in contact with it as long as you can. It doesn't have to always be very long. As long as your presentation is right. If the plug is washing out, it's no good. It's just the fish isn't going to eat that. So and the conditions are always depending on what the wind is, but it's all about angles. And sometimes I'll find myself even casting into the wind, finding an angle where I'm casting into the wind, because the plug is not going to sweep out. If you're casting straight into the wind, you're not going to. If the wind's at your back, that's great. You can cast it a little bit further, but the wind is also, you have to figure, is going to blow your line too, and it's going to push that lure out. So while you might have casted 15 feet further because you had the wind at your back, depending on the angle you took, it doesn't do any good if the wind is blowing your line and you have a big bow in your line, and when the plug hits it, you've got this tremendous bow in your line and you can't set it. Well, that was great because I casted it out like a mile, but I can't stay in contact with it, and I wasn't able to set the hook. So I might limit myself casting into the wind, but now I know that I'm not going to have a huge bow on my line, and even though the cast is shorter, the shorter amount of time is still more productive because I'm in contact with that lure.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, and so I'll typically throw things that you won't, and I mean, I had one night fishing with my friend Doug, and he's a really good fisherman. He's a better fisherman than me. And I was throwing a junior, and I was just catching fish after fish after fish. And he was throwing bucktails, and he was catching fish. But I was catching bigger fish because I was using it was a bigger profile.
Presentation, yeah.
But it wasn't easy fishing, but I was getting bigger fish. And he was like, "What are you using?" And I'm like, "I'm using my junior." And he's coming over, and he's like, talking to me, and I hooked up to like a 36-pounder, while he's coming over. And he was like, "Are you kidding me?" And it was during, just using that technique. So
Montauk surf fishing is definitely super cool. I find it like, I don't know, it's like mesmerizing how awesome, climbing up on a rock with a wetsuit and the Von Stahl Lemon-Glass setup, throwing plugs and stuff like that. It's all very cool.
There's just something about Montauk. I mean, the history of it, but there's just something about it that attracts surf fishermen. I mean, you look at Montauk and it just looks fishy. Even if you're not a fisherman, like I take, she's my wife now. I took my girlfriend down there, and, I would stick her out on the north side. I would make a little campfire, and I'd go swim out to a rock and fish. And she'd just like, "It's beautiful out here." She's like, "This, I can't even believe this is New York, And you'll see a lot of areas that are like that too on the North Shore, that just, you're like, "I'm in New York, this is New York. I'm only a couple, like 2 hours away from Manhattan or whatever."
That's what I love about going out east on the island, and that's what I love about Long Island, going off on a bit of a tangent, but that's what I love about Long Island. You got Montauk and you got Suffolk County, Riverhead, and such beautiful places on the North Fork, and then you have New York City, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, right to the west. So that's it's pretty cool.
Which is some fantastic fishing as well. Don't overlook the urban areas. Just because they're not as scenic as say Montauk. Some of those urban areas, man, there's some really good fishing, especially this time of year, and even in the late season.
In the last podcast I did, Joey mentioned Raritan Bay, saying that's where a lot of the fish go in the early season. So like you're right, you can't overlook those areas.
Yeah, well, if you look at like where the fish are wintering over, where they're at, it just makes sense. I mean, they're coming out of the rivers. It's like, they turn there, they go into the Long Island Sound. And that area being relatively shallow, the water is always going to be significantly. It's a good area to concentrate on if you have a cold winter or a cold spring like last year. It was so cold in the spring. Our spring bite, and there's not as many fish around. Our spring bite in our local waters was a very short bite. It wasn't as good.
Very short. It was pretty good, but it was very short.
It was short. I mean, for me, I say that I like fishing and I do better in the summer because I do, but I fish my ass off in the spring, and it was like, it just wasn't. It just wasn't what I would hope it'd be.
Going back to Montauk, I kind of just thought about this just because I had a conversation with somebody about it this morning. You said the history of Montauk, and this doesn't really have to do anything with fishing, but if you fish Montauk and you don't know this, it's pretty cool. How Camp Hero was this huge, military science base in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And even up to now, it's protected by the United States government. They did all these, crazy tests on people and all those type of things in Montauk. So if you go fishing in Montauk Point and the lighthouse, know that, you're what 500 feet away from like a huge bunker right under Montauk Point.
And you know, it's what you see above ground. Can you only imagine what's going on underground that you don't have no idea that's there? You know, I mean, one of the areas that I used to fish as a kid was Fort Tilden. And that's another area. You know, there's just and there's bunkers. All I mean, that you know, you just see a bunch of hills and stuff like that. But there's all you know, military. There's basically a military base underground at Fort Tilden. It's just you know, miles of bunkers under there. It's kind of cool.
It is definitely pretty cool. It just adds to
the mystique of it all.
Yeah, of Montauk. It is like a pretty, you know, I don't know. I don't want to use the word mystical, but like a very different place. It has a different energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty cool. I really want to head out to Montauk, get some corkers, and, you know, go surf fishing there.
It's a great area, you know. And it's just, I like Montauk. I mean, and I'm liking it a little bit more, even though the fishing isn't as great because less people are going there. In the summertime, it's, you know, you go into town at Montauk and it's just like it's a zoo. But you know, you get out on the north side or even on the south side at night, and you don't see another soul. There's nobody around. I love it, especially with the canal bite being so good, because even the fishermen that I would traditionally see there, the fishing is not as good. In Montauk, it's compared to what it was, you know, 10 years ago, it is not even a fraction of what it used to be. But I still go there because I love it. It's beautiful and it's quiet. And like I said, the canal bite, I love the canal bite because there's nobody in Montauk in the summer. And, you know, it's even quieter. I mean, I could go up and down and, you know, up and down the beach and there's just nobody around. It's great. You know, I love the solitude. I don't like fishing in crowds.
Yeah, Montauk is definitely pretty cool in that. Last year when I went and I was primarily on the south side of the point, so kind of into Turtle Cove area.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't want to, you know, venture off too much, especially because I'm fairly new to
it's a great
the
area
Montauk
though.
scene.
You know, for the accessibility that it offers. I mean, besides that, if that spot was deep in the south side, I'd fish it. You know, I mean, it's accessible. I don't spend a lot of time there because, you know, if you are there in the summertime, that's typically where you're going to find people. But that doesn't mean that there's not fish there. I mean, I just don't fish because I don't want to be around a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
But if I were to go to Montauk and I was, you know, I hate to tell people, like, you know, because there is, again, like I said, there's no certainties. But I would focus around, you know, the lighthouse. I mean, those are your best chances of fish coming through, because those fish, like I mentioned, like using the highways, you know, so if those fish are stacked out in the rips and they're moving with the current they've been on the south side, almost those fish are all going to go past that point, and it's the closest point that you can intercept them. So it is a good area to fish, because if there's fish around, at some point those fish traveling that island using those highways are going to go right past that.
Yeah.
You know, it's an area that, you know, it's an area that, you know, if you're going to fish, and you don't want to have to spend a lot of time, but you're willing to say, all right, I'll stay here for the night and I'll stick it out and I'll be patient. There's a good chance that you're going to have some big fish coming through there.
Before you mentioned you were fishing from the north side of the Montauk Point. Mm-hmm. Me and my cousin, we usually do all our fishing together. You know, if you heard me say TJ, that's my cousin. Uh-huh. We went to the north, you know, side of the point, and there's so many rocks. I literally had no idea what to do. I just looked at everything. I was like, I have no clue how to fish this.
Yeah, it's a different world.
Especially being here, sandy beaches in Long Beach. Yeah. You know, going to like a super rocky area like that, it's a totally different scene.
It is, and it can be discouraging, because the things that you might typically throw, like a bucktail on the sand beach, like, you know, if you bump the bottom on a sand beach, that's fine. If you spend too much time on the bottom in Montauk, you could lose what you have. And it's another reason, again, why I like metal lips. And I adjust my metal lips swimmers a little bit because the water's a little bit shallower. If I'm, you know, I mean, you could push out far and get into deeper water, but I'll adjust them. And that's the good thing about fishing a metal lip. You know, a lot of guys worry because they spend a lot of money on it and they don't want to lose it, but it's wood and it's buoyant. So if you do get it stuck on the bottom, you know, you just let out a little line, wait a little while. It will eventually make its way back up to the surface, unlike a bucktail. Not to, you know, bucktails are deadly in Montauk. If you don't have a bucktail in your bag, you're not fishing Montauk, right? But that's the good thing about wood. You know, you will, and I try to tell guys, you know, they spend a lot of money on plugs and things like that, but and it's fun because it's our hobby. Just like you like fancy cars, you like fancy things, you like things with nice paint jobs. But you have to kind of look at these things as tools, you know, and they are tools for catching fish. That's the first thing that they're designed for. So don't be afraid to get them down near the bottom, and don't be afraid even in those rocky areas of getting hung up. You know, yeah, I go through, you know, tons of soft plastics and jig heads, you know, because that's where the fish are, though. They're near the bottom. And, you know, and guys will be like, oh, you know, I don't want to lose it. So they're fishing the surface. And, you know, you're just doing a disservice to yourself, because that's, you know, you'll pick up fish there, but the big fish are down in those rocks. They're feeding, you know. That's why it's so good. It's structure. And it's, you know, fish utilize structure, you know, for a lot of reasons, but you have to think that they're there feeding, you know. And that's why Montauk is so good. It's because of the rocks, you know. It's the cooler water too. It's structure. It's hard structure.
Yeah.
So it's consistent structure. So where on the sand beaches where the structure like shifts around and moves, I can go to Montauk. I mean, things in Montauk change because you get storms and the sand will come in, and you get storms and the sand will go out. So it changes in that aspect. But I can go in now because I know Montauk. I can go in and I can look at what the wind is. I can look at what the moon phase is, and I've already drawn up a plan before I've even gone out there, you know. And I know, oh, the wind just turned. The wind's been, you know, it's been blowing southeast for a couple of days. I know where I want to go. I know what spot I want to go to. And it's good because you know what rock you're going to go out to. You know what hole you want to fish because of what the wind is doing and the conditions.
That just all comes with experience.
That just comes with fishing, you know, fishing all the time. I mean, I've been going out there, and I don't have to fish it as much anymore, which is convenient because now as I'm getting older, I have more responsibilities. I have a wife. My time is limited. So I now can go out around the moons and I can watch the wind. If it rained all day, I'm like, well, do I really want to go to Montauk? Because I know the south side's going to be pretty muddied up. Does it really pay for me? The wind's out of the west. No. Why go kill myself? I'll go take the wife out to dinner, make her happy, do things around the house, take care of responsibilities, and she's understanding of that, because then there'll be times like where all of a sudden I'm like, babe, I gotta go, I'm gonna run, you know, or you know, I'm taking off because the conditions are right, and I don't have to spend as much time as I used to, just because. And it's what we didn't touch base on is keeping a log, you know, just keeping a log and noting it. Especially those times that you didn't catch. You know, a lot of times, you know, when I first started doing a log, I would write everything down, like only times that I caught. When I caught, that's great, you know, but you really want to take note of when you didn't catch it and try to think of the big picture. And the big picture is something that, I used to catch a lot of fish because I grounded and pounded. I just fished all the time. I burnt my shoulder. I had to have shoulder surgery because I would just fish like nonstop. And I caught fish because of that. But then, and I always fished by myself, but I started fishing with my buddy Pete, who started, the Comanche Surfcasting, and he was a lot smarter about it. Even though he was newer into fishing than I was, he was always asking questions like, why did this happen? Why did that happen? And it's like, I would answer his questions and it would make me stop and think. So, when you do catch a fish, instead of just, you're really excited, but try to put the whole puzzle together and ask yourself, why did I catch it? Why was that fish there? Why? And a lot of that comes to you going back also and looking at your log. And it was interesting because there's so many factors that contribute into why you're catching fish and why you're not catching fish. And there's so many different things between tide, bait, water temperature, air temperature, barometric pressure is huge. And all of these things come into play of why you caught that fish or why you didn't catch those fish. And the more detail you put into your log, the more that you can go back and you could start to plug those little pieces of the puzzle together so that you don't have to ground and pound like I used to. You can be smarter and you can go back and you can look, and you look in your log and say, oh, okay, these things are all adding up and this is the time that I want to be at point A, and you can keep logs. I got lazy after Sandy. I lived in Rockaway and I lived one house off the beach and I lost. I had stacks of composition books and I lost them all. But so for a couple of years following that, I got really lazy about keeping a log, and there was missing pieces there. So now even with the phone, you have, so it's so easy now. Like I can come back to my truck and I can text myself. Or what I recently did is you can create Facebook pages that are secret groups that's just yours. You know, nobody else can see it. And you can go back in there and you can, you know, put all your information in. So you can come in that night and you can type in, oh, you know, I fished this, the wind was this, that, I caught this, I didn't catch that, I caught it on this, this is the bait that I saw, you know, and it's great because you can go back and Facebook, you know, when you will send you memories from like 2 years ago, and you're like, you know, it's kind of cool to be able to do, and it's your own personal little, like, you know, online diary. But I would really, I get lazy sometimes, and it's something that you really should try to do when the memory's fresh, when you come in that night. And sometimes, you know, you fish like 7 hours or 8 hours and, you know, you're dead. You don't want to do it, but it's really important to try to keep, if you want to be successful and you want to make life easier on yourself in the long run, so you can come back and learn from your experiences. But keeping a log is really important.
Yeah, that's definitely something, especially like I said before earlier in the podcast, I'm very young. If I start now, I feel like it'll have a good payoff. Yeah. You know, in a couple of years.
And like I said, write down, as much as they're not exciting, write down those times that you didn't catch. They're almost as important as the times that you did catch, because you'll learn why you didn't catch, you know, and it can sometimes save you a lot more time than learning from why you did catch, you know. You know,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. So we pretty much went over, you know, a lot of things from, you know, your metal lip swimmers, how you got into building these custom plugs, you know, fishing Montauk, fishing the inlets, and even a bit of the back bays and all that type of stuff, you know, baits, structures. Is there anything else you feel that, you know, you want to add to this?
I just want to really reiterate about, you know, the catch and release, you know, the state of the fisheries in really poor condition. So please, you know, when you're out there, respect these fish. Your neighbor can go to the fish market. You don't need to keep a fish for your neighbor. You know, if you want to keep a fish for yourself, that's fine. I mean, I've made a commitment, like, I'm not killing any fish this year. If I kill a fish, you know, from fishing, you know, then I'm not gonna throw a dead fish back. But to myself, I'm not gonna keep any fish unless there is that incident. You know, that's just, I'm not saying everybody else has to do that. That's what I'm going to do. I really promote catch and release. And I just, you know, I hope everybody else really, you know, let's have a future for, you know, for our future for these fish.
Definitely. That's a very respectable thing. Awesome. So everybody could check out your social media, which is...
you can go onto Voorhies Customs on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram. I think it's just my last name. I think C Voorhies on Instagram. But, you know, but if you want to, you know, reach out to me, the Voorhies Customs. Also check us out on Comanche Surfcasting. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We'll also come out with Pete puts together a great video for Surfcasters Journal on the Comanche Surfcasting. Surfcaster Journals, they've been really good to us, and they give us a spot in their magazine. So you follow our adventures. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We're just out there having fun. We bust each other's chops, and you know, it's not about egos. It's just about having a good time, and we're all here to learn from each other. You know, I mean, I can learn, you know, from a 12-year-old fishing the beach. I can learn from an 80-year-old fishing the beach. Don't be too proud. You know, it's all about having a good time.
Yeah, that's how you gotta live life. You
Absolutely,
know?
absolutely.
Definitely. Thank you so much for getting on this podcast. Great meeting you too. Thank you everybody for watching. You know, check out, you know, Chris's social media, everything that he said previously. Also check out my YouTube channel. I have this podcast on Spotify and iTunes, so you could listen to it on either of those or YouTube. Check out my Instagram, you know, if you don't already follow. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.